Your support helps us bring you programs you love. Go to WyomingPBS.org, click on Support, and become a sustaining member or an annual member. It's easy and secure. Thank you.
Guiding Yellowstone Park from its winter season to its summer season is a huge job, and it's one of many things Park Superintendent Cam Sholly has on his plate this year. As Yellowstone marks its 150th anniversary, the busy man in charge has a 5-part plan to guide the park into its 3rd century. It's an ambitious agenda, and there's no instruction manual. Join us for the first of our 2-part interview with Park Superintendent Cam Sholly. Starting now on Wyoming Chronicle.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.
I'm Steve Peck of Wyoming PBS. We're joined today at Yellowstone National Park by the Park Superintendent, Cam Sholly. Superintendent Sholly, thanks for being with us on Wyoming Chronicle. We've been to Yellowstone in the past with the station, but never this particular time of year when we're gearing down from the winter, or much more importantly, gearing up for the summer season. I imagine that is a much bigger job. Am I right about that?
Absolutely. Yeah, we have a great team, fortunately. Summers are unpredictable. We know it's going to be busy. A lot of hiring going on. The winters are a time that we really kind of prep for the summer and then what's become the shoulder season. So it's no longer just a May to August or June to August season in the summer. It's really starts in April, ends in late October. So we have a much longer season, which takes a lot more prep time. We just came off of a terrific winter season, not a lot of snow.
What makes a good winter season?
Well, I think the winter season is just different. I think everybody sees the traffic jams and all the wildlife jams in the summertime. That's kind of the normal for Yellowstone as far as what people see many times. But the winter, we have about 30,000 visitors on average per month in the winter, compared to 1 million or so in the summer months per month. So it's just a different type of experience. It's really important, especially from the standpoint of enjoyment in a different type of setting, and the economics to the gateway communities that really survive in many ways on the winter tourism in Yellowstone, at a point where tourism is not at its highest in these states at that time of year.
You mentioned visitors. What's the difference between visitors and visitations? We hear these astronomically high numbers, but that doesn't mean 4 million people came into the park, right? How is that calculated exactly?
Well, the way we count visitation is you picture a tire counter on a entrance station road. There are surveys that are done that count for periods of time the number of people per vehicle and do an average. And that's usually done every 5 years. And we use that average per vehicle every time a car goes across the counter. And so it's roughly each car is about 2.6 visits. And so if a car comes in once, it's counted 2.6 visits. If it happens to go out and back 2 or 3 times, that car's counted 2 or 3 times. So it's a difference between visits. Those are not necessarily unique visitors, but that's how we calculate those.
And in recent years, these numbers have just really been huge, haven't they, compared to your earlier experience with the park, for example?
Well, I think Yellowstone, the first year Yellowstone had 1 million people in the park in a single year was 1948. The first year we had 2 million in the park in a single year was 1965. We hit 3 million in a single year in 1992 and 4 million in 2015. So we've had the luxury of 10, 15, 20 years between each additional million visits. And we peaked at 4.2 million in 2016, the Park Service Centennial. Went backwards about 250,000 in 17, 18, 19, and then COVID hit, which has been interesting. We'll talk about that, I know. And last year we registered almost 4.9 visits in the park.
So no one can predict the future exactly, but I think
we're probably safe in predicting a big year for visitors in 2022.
Absolutely. I think we've got to put the 2021 number into a bit of context. Because of COVID primarily and construction, we had about 20% less overnight accommodations available in the park in 2021 than we did, say, in 2019. And what that meant is that 20% of the visitors that would have come in once and been counted once went out and were counted multiple times. So we did not see 800,000 or 1 million more additional visits in a single year. We had more people coming in and leaving multiple times. There isn't a statistical category that we count and track that was substantially higher in 21 than 19 and 18. So we actually feel we were probably around that 4 million visit number without the anomaly of the overnight accommodations. But 4 million is still busy. And this park is 2.2 million acres. About 1,750 acres of that are roads, parking lots, and pullouts. And the vast majority of people that come to this park stay in that small percentage of the park. They enjoy it, but it puts a strain on certain parts of the park at certain times of the year.
Do you ever want to get up on the roof and say, hey, welcome everybody, glad you're here, but there's more to Yellowstone Park than this traffic jam, that long line in that parking lot? I mean, it's just, there's so much that's never seen, and it's a shame in a way, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I always say that the majority of this park never sees a visitor. That's good and bad, right? But remember, about over 70% of visitors are first-time visitors.
Right. And you can't ask them not to go to Old Faithful if they've
right.
never been here before.
It's a bucket list trip. They're here with their family. They're enjoying it. Many times, first time they've seen a bison in the wild or an elk or a wolf. And so, that's something that we have to manage. It's something that we spend a lot of time on both protecting the resources of this park and understanding what it takes to manage that level of visitation, and also create a good visitor experience. I think those are all things that are important moving forward for us to think about.
You're in your 4th year on the job. What a 4 years it's been to come on this job, beginning with becoming the superintendent of what is certainly one of the crown jewels in the park system, if not the one. We're from Wyoming, so we have our opinions about that. But then the COVID experience comes along, these big visitors numbers come along, the 150th anniversary of the park, and now the biggest airport in the region closed for a couple of months, affecting travel in that way. How's it all been going for these 4 years?
It's gone by really fast. Yeah. Fortunately, we have, in all my assignments, one of the most amazing teams in the National Park Service and partners. We have no shortage of opinions, as you know, on what we should be doing, how we should be doing it.
You've had a lot of experience in the Park Service from your boyhood. It's almost the family business in a way. You felt prepared, I'm sure, or what prepares you to deal with this unexpected, gigantic contingency such as a viral pandemic?
Well, I don't think anything can prepare you for this job, no matter what your experience level is. You have to learn the issues. You have to learn the politics around the issues. You have to know the law, policy, and regulations that govern all of that. And most importantly, you have to have a good team. You have to have a strategy. You have to have priorities that are clear that people can get behind, both in the park and outside the park. And I think we've largely been able to do that. We're definitely got areas that we need to work on, I'm sure we'll talk about. But I'm not positive there's a playbook for exactly how you manage Yellowstone, because every day it's something different. And we have really good people that are in place that help navigate, and good support from the region and the Washington office and the department. And we, I think, are moving in a direction that's strategic. We're executing on a lot of these priorities that are very important to the future of Yellowstone. At the same time, taking a pause this year in some ways to commemorate 150 years and really look at what happened pre-Yellowstone, recognizing the importance of American Indian tribes in this area, and charting a path forward for the future. And that's not just in operations and programs and things that we manage in the park, but with our partners, with our tribes, to do a better job moving forward into the next 150 years and make sure this park is in as good or better condition than it is right now.
In 1972, my father happened to be on the Yellowstone Centennial Commission, and the big thing that year was putting big yellow spray-painted boulders on routes from the Wyoming and Montana, Idaho state lines. If you followed those and looked for one of those every 40 miles or something, you could get to Yellowstone in case you couldn't read a map. And there was a big banquet and a gala. And I'm not saying that's all that was planned, but that was the centerpiece of it. This year, the 150th, you spoke to Wyoming travel and tourism leaders recently about some things that you had, that the park was planning to do that were important to you, important to the Park Service, important to the park. And I want to talk to you about several of those. I was thinking recently when I saw an item in unrelated topic about a building from the 1870s that was considered to be the first skyscraper in the United States. And it's like 8 stories tall or something. I think rather than just piling bricks up, they built some sort of skeletal structure. I'm looking at that 150 years later and thinking, that's a skyscraper? There must be 500,000 buildings in the country taller than that. But in 1872, with Yellowstone, they got that right. And it's still the one. Would you agree?
Absolutely. I mean, Yellowstone's a global icon. It's very important to America.
It's aged well.
It has. I think if you think about
The first 90 years or so, we got a lot wrong. We were killing every wolf in this park 100 years ago.
almost every predator,
We reduced the bison population from tens of thousands to less than 25 animals. We were feeding grizzly bears out of garbage dumps in the 1960s.
I will say I'm old enough to have been in a car, Pontiac Bonneville, where a black bear came right up to the window of the car, and my grandmother fed it a Ritz cracker dipped in honey.
Yeah.
That was the national park experience of 1966, at least it was for us that trip. So these changes have been enormous related to the challenge of conservation, preservation, and access. And now we think we're getting them much better than we were then.
well, we've worked really hard over the last 5 decades or a little bit more to put the pieces back together.
This ecosystem, I think we've done that very successfully. Doesn't mean that we've succeeded.
I think if between climate change and any number of other threats to Yellowstone, I think it's a really important time for us to understand that while we've corrected many of the mistakes of the past, we very easily could repeat them again if we're not careful. We don't
Learn from what we've accomplished over the last 50 years and build on that in a successful way.
I've told my son many times, the day will come when the things you think you're so smart about will seem ridiculous to your children the way I sometimes do to you. That's just the name of the game, and the job is being alert, being aware, being adaptable.
Yeah, and people care about this place. There are so many different viewpoints on different issues. What we try to focus on is, where's the area in which we have the ability to work together? Where's common ground? There are people
on the one side of an issue and on the opposite end. No matter what you do, you're not going to do it right, and you're not going to change their minds. But there's a lot of room for us to talk about how we balance the conservation,
economic priorities that Yellowstone's involved with. And I think that's really important moving forward.
What, if you care to enumerate some of them, when you were gearing up for, say, the 150th for your tenure on the job, when you spoke to the policymakers, legislators, others in Cheyenne recently, what were some of these priorities that you felt were very important during your tenure as superintendent?
Well, we focused largely on 5 major priorities. One is we call focus on the core, which is the workforce in Yellowstone. And
Probably the biggest action item within that priority is improving employee housing, and we could talk a little bit more about that. The second is strengthening the Yellowstone ecosystem. As I just mentioned, Yellowstone's ecosystem health-wise is in better condition now than it ever has been since Yellowstone became a park, but that does not mean there's not a lot of work to do to maintain and improve the condition moving forward. Third priority is, really delivering a world-class visitor experience, and we want to be able to do that, and that becomes more and more challenging as visitation increases. And so we have a lot of things that we're working on to focus on visitor experience. Within that, protecting the resources, ensuring that we're not, or we at least understand what the impacts are on our staff and infrastructure. Our fourth is investing in infrastructure, and then our fifth is really focused on building coalitions and partnerships externally.
How many of those things are due to your analysis and preparation and opinion? How much of that comes from the partnerships that you're talking about, the Park Service, non-Park Service constituencies?
All my predecessors have focused on different things and done a really good job in different areas. And so what those 5 priorities have come out of is building on the positives in the work that's been done in the past, an identification of need and areas that we need to focus on, and a forward-thinking view of how we keep and maintain Yellowstone in a good operating posture and a good ecosystem condition and things like that. And so at the same time, recognizing how valuable Yellowstone is, and it doesn't matter which lens you look through, whether you're from New York or London or any number of places, Yellowstone is symbolic of a lot of things for a lot of people. And so really having the focus priorities that can move us forward in the right directions in the areas that are most important is what we've looked at.
I had a young employee of mine when I was in the private sector before working for WyomingPBS, and he spent a couple of summers working in Yellowstone, and his job was to man a chainsaw and cut down trees and build the little pyramid piles and burn them, and trail preparation and fire prevention, all that kind of thing. And when he heard I was going to be speaking to you today, he said, be sure to ask him about housing. This is probably 15 years ago that he was living here, and the word he used was tumultuous was the situation, the housing that he was in. He loved it, the job. He came back another year, but he wanted to know about that. So tell me about the big housing project that's being undertaken right now.
So we have 4 major goals within our housing strategy. One is, we had
65 to 70 1960s and 70s trailers, which he probably lived in one of those. And so with the support of the previous administration and this administration, we've continued to work to get rid of every trailer in the park and replace it with high quality housing. We have about 450 total units for employees in the park. So that's goal number 1, was to get rid of the worst housing and replace it with good housing, and we're well on our way to doing that. The second goal was really to improve the condition of non-trailer housing, appliances from the 70s being replaced, painting the walls, a lot of deferred maintenance in many of these housing units, things like that. The third was we have a lot of historic housing in this park, including right over here in Fort Yellowstone, was to focus on not only improving historic housing, but the condition of those historic structures, which is core to our mission as well. And so we've done, I think, a really good job of making progress in goals 1, 2, and 3.
goal 4 is
probably adding capacity or finding a different model to be able to house employees as we see these housing markets turn to VRBO and Airbnbs, as we see sales prices at record levels, and as we have a pretty large segment of the workforce that bought houses, say in Gardner back in the 1990s and 2000s when it was affordable, and now they're retiring, their replacements cannot afford to purchase housing, and there's no rentals available. So we have a significant issue that's on the horizon there. That's we're already seeing many jobs that we fly, people turn them down because of a lack of available housing. So that's something we need to focus on.
And that becomes the issue of a park superintendent, housing that isn't even in the park because it's your workforce. Though.
Right, right.
How do you fix that? What's an example of something that could help there? Is it's in park capacity still possibly, or?
I think it's a mix. So we're talking. Gardner's doing a great job right now with a public-private partnership to build affordable housing in Gardner. We're going to look at partnering with them on that to see what part of our larger problem would that solve. So there might be a part of it that's an external solution, and there may be part of it that's building within the park. We aren't going to build our way out of these issues. Increasing visitation, we're not going to 4-lane roads, we're not going to build massive new developments and things like that. However, I think if you look at Yellowstone as a whole and you look at the developed envelope that we have, which is relatively small, proportional to the size of the park, there may be some opportunities for us to add housing units in certain areas.
You talked about infrastructure. I know there's substantial road construction, reconstruction going on right now, and it's going to continue for some years to come.
Well, yeah, we've been very fortunate to have support of Washington administration in obtaining a large number of funds from the Great American Outdoors Act for, replacing bridges, redoing large segments of roads, wastewater treatment facilities. There's a lot of things that people don't really see when it comes to deferred maintenance and what it takes to actually host visitation in this park. And so, I know road construction isn't always popular, but it's something that's very necessary. This Dunraven Pass Road project that's about to open up here next month, that's been shut down for 2 years. That hadn't been worked on largely since the 1930s, and they did a beautiful job, and the public is going to really like. So, I think it was worth the interruption and not being able to travel on Dunraven when they see the final product. And so, similar with keeping people safe and making sure that we're addressing deferred maintenance is really important. The Great American Outdoors Act has been a big part of that.
So you mentioned we're not trying to build a freeway through Yellowstone. What is better about the roads now in the terms that you talked about, specifically compared to what they were, that still keeps the character of the park?
Well, Dunraven project widened the road a little bit. If anybody remembers traveling on it, there was always potholes and always things that we were not keeping up with. There were areas where, and we don't normally add lots of pullouts per se, but we do add them where we identify them being necessary. So there are, a lot of times it's redoing old pullouts and making them better traffic flow, more conducive for wildlife viewing or whatever the case is. But generally speaking, it's taking this investment and then working together in the future to put the amount of investment that's necessary to protect what we just spent $30 million on, so it doesn't deteriorate again to the condition that it was, in 20 or 30 years.
So you see here are the priorities coming together, the better visitor experience plus the infrastructure. They work together. Speaking of transportation, I know, was it last year that the little pilot project involving the driverless buses moving people from one spot to the other was tried out? How did that go, and are there plans to, could it expand, do you think?
So that was a great pilot project with Veep, or Beep, a company Beep, and the goal there wasn't to move a lot of visitors. We ended up moving over 10,000 visitors on 2 small shuttles, but was to test the technology. Can it work? Are there areas that are conducive for, especially areas like Old Faithful and the Grand Canyon of the Yellowstone, that have large parking capacity already, where we can get people to park their cars, and then if we have a shuttle that's convenient and can move them to different attractions within the park, within those areas. And we think that's got a lot of promise in the future. I have a lot of folks that talk to me about building shuttle systems in the park or capping visitation. I think people need to understand that we're doing this strategically and surgically. Yellowstone's a very large park. It's probably not a one-size-fits-all. I've articulated that we are working to become better, more efficient, and in some areas more aggressive with visitation management where it's needed, using a variety of different methods, including shuttles. For all of those people that don't want more infrastructure in the park, or think about a shuttle system we're doing a feasibility study right now in between Old Faithful and West Yellowstone, is the amount of infrastructure that has to go in to create a shuttle system and what the cost is. So you're looking at massive additional parking lots at Old Faithful on one end, large parking lots at Madison on the other end, shuttle stops in between. and at a pretty high operating cost each year. And so, we're looking at, is that a solution? Is it worth $10, $12 million a year plus a $50 million capital investment up front, plus building a garage for the shuttles to be worked on and housing mechanics and drivers and dispatchers and things like that? Maybe, but what we want to make sure that we're not making bad decisions and that we're using the best available data possible and being smart with our investment dollars.
I knew someone who came to Yellowstone last year when the pilot project was operating, and she said she wanted to ride it and waited. And it's not Disneyland, of course, but at least in terms of some people, that pilot project in that limited area with that vehicle and that technology was something that was well received, at least by some, I'm sure. But as you say, it's nothing. It hardly compares to making it park-wide. Any park-wide experience or decision is just monumental, I'm sure.
Right. You got 5 entrances into the park. 70% of the visitation comes through the Montana entrances. You can have a mile back up at West Yellowstone and no one in line at Cook City in Northeast Entrance or even East Entrance and Cody. So there are plenty of places in this park that are not busy even in July and August. And then there's the Midway Geyser Basins and the Grand Canyons of the Yellowstones and the Lamars and Norris Geyser Basin, where you have a convergence of people that want to see those areas. And I think we've done a good job of developing a range of alternatives to manage those areas better. But that's going to need to become more aggressive as we move forward.
We've been speaking today with Cam Sholly, the superintendent of Yellowstone National Park. Thanks for being with us today on Wyoming Chronicle.
Thanks, Steve. My pleasure to be here.
Funding for this program is made possible in part by the Wyoming Humanities Council, helping Wyoming take a closer look at life through the humanities, thinkwhy.org, and by the members of the Wyoming PBS Foundation. Thank you for your support.